The first films I made were very academic and intellectual. They were very structuralist, very postmodernist, and they were about film language per se. They were about, you know, Godard suggested that the cinema is the truth, 24 frames a second. It was about paradigms, about the notion of the frames going through the cinema. It was very current and fashionable because we're talking about structuralism in the early 1960s.
You're talking about the shorts.
They were shorts, yeah, and there must be 30 of them. There are many of them, one after the other after the other. They're all made for very, very small sums of money.
I'd like to discuss a little bit about your vision of the death of cinema.
I don't think cinema has ever been alive. I don't think you make films. I don't think any of us here have ever seen a film. All we've seen is 113 years of illustrated text. Every single film you see, you can see the director following the text, because all the stories, all the plots, all the narratives come out of the bookshop. So whether you're Scorsese or Godard or Spielberg or Almodovar, whoever you want to be, all films start with text, they don't start with images. I was trained as a painter, so for me the image is primary. I need to have an imagistic cinema, a cinema about pictures and not about text. Most directors are visually illiterate. They don't even know what 8,000 years of the painting tradition has meant. So I think cinema is at a curious disadvantage that really it is like, as I suggested, it's illustration. And illustration to me is a dirty word. I don't want to illustrate, I want to be a prime creator. I think cinema language, as I'm sure you do, is extraordinary, but cinema language is wasted on cinema. What are most cinema films? They are adult bedtime stories that you look at just before you go to bed, when you're half asleep. Why is it we watch cinema just before we go to sleep? What is it? A cup of cocoa, a bromide, alcoholic drink to send you to sleep? Cinema should be much, 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 much more important than that. And of course it rarely, rarely, rarely ever is. So you can see that in polemical terms, in theoretical terms, and also with a certain amount of passion, we deserve a much better cinema than we've got. You know what they say about politics? We deserve the politics we've got. And I think in a curious way, because we're lazy, because we're indolent, because we're not radical, and because we don't want to try hard enough, we have a really miserable, mundane, pathetic, narrative-based cinema which does not entertain the human imagination. So I think we should scrap it and start all over again.
Is there any film historiography that you make to yourself? Let's say Andy Warhol, Derek Jarman, Fellini was a guy that used to draw his visions, and Kurosawa.
My pantheon of heroes would not be filmmakers. Well, possibly Eisenstein would be the only one. I think Eisenstein is probably the only film director you can put up there with Beethoven and Shakespeare and not be embarrassed. But it's very, very difficult to find any other filmmakers of such high stature. My heroes would be the great Baroque painters, for example, like Rembrandt and Caravaggio and Velasquez. These are extraordinary people with amazing sense of vision, and you hardly ever find that in cinema. That's not so surprising, really, because the history of painting is 8,000 years long, and we've only seen 112 years of cinema. Maybe there hasn't been enough time. You know, there's only room for one Picasso at a time, I think. You can't have two Picassos, unless you're very lucky. All the best works of art in the entire history of civilization have always been created by an elite. So when Michelangelo paints the Sistine Chapel, he's commissioned by the Pope Julius II, with all the privileges. When Caravaggio paints all these extraordinary paintings, he is looked after by cardinals and by the church money. When all those extraordinary impressionists finally got into our popular vein, there was a way in which they were all bought by the rich French bourgeoisie. So there always has to be a particular relationship between privilege and high art. It's untenable, I wish it was not true, but egalitarian art, non-elitist art, is normally rubbish. And the big examples of that in the 20th century are Soviet realism and Hollywood. One Russia, one America. And it's a waste, you know.
The digital distribution, the way people now can open a small theater somewhere and place those art films that were not, that couldn't get inside the system, now they can. This is something that will make a big change.
No, I think, I used to complain, you know, cinema always made itself inaccessible. Where could I go and see Kubrick's 2001 on a screen it was devised for? Impossible. If I want to see it this afternoon anywhere in Brazil, it'll be impossible. I won't be able to do it. Probably anywhere in Europe I wouldn't be able to do it. But now, the last 10 years, and you're a good example of this, the whole of the world cinema can now be represented on DVDs, which is extraordinary. There are a whole mass of new students now are becoming becoming associated and acquainted with cinema history, which has never happened before, which I think has to be good.